Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today we're going to talk about the Children's Museum, Port Discovery Children's Museum, but I'm going to start out with a confession of defeat, or at least retreat. By the time I put together the material for this video, the heat index was over 100 degrees. And when I went outside to start filming, I thought the better of it. I would like to say that I retreated to my living room here to save you from watching me sweat. But in truth, I think it was as much about self-preservation as anything. But here we are back in my living room in Bolton Hill. All right, so Port Discovery comes along later. Let's start back in the start when that area was known as Harrison's Marsh. Thomas Harrison was a gentleman who owned it in the 1780s. So this is 1780s, not 1880s, but in the 1780s, he drains it and clears it and then goes into real estate development. I think that this is a theme for early Baltimore is real estate development. And he does it in a way that's not unique to Baltimore, but is something that we in Baltimore latched onto pretty quickly and held onto, and that's the ground rent system. So instead, if you bought a lot from Harrison to build your house or to build your shop, instead of buying the ground and the right to develop, you bought just the right to develop. Harrison kept the land underneath. So each year you would pay a ground rent, a rent to him for the right to continue occupying his property with your building. This was happening in Fells Point. It was happening in Little Italy. My house here in Bolton Hill had ground rents for a long time, even 150 years later. Very controversial, even to this day, very controversial. But what it did allow is for Baltimore to develop quickly. A lot more people could afford just the right to develop than could afford the full package of the land and the right to develop. So you had lots of people able to erect lots of buildings relatively quickly. One of the people who did that was a prominent family, the Diffenderfer family. Michael Diffenderfer moves down from Pennsylvania, and during the Revolutionary War, starts a china shop, a ceramic shop. He then leases his building on Baltimore Street out to a baker, and is part of the early movement in turning this marshy area into a neighborhood. Harrison decides to build a market, and that would help attract both homeowners and shops. And so he builds 3 market buildings in this strip just south of Baltimore Street. And the market does very well, and it helps the neighborhood thrive. Even though Harrison calls it Center Market, C-E-N-T-R-E, and a lot of people know it as Center Market, most people back then kept calling it the Marsh Market because that's what it was. It was Harrison's Marsh, and it was the Marsh Market. And it does well up until the years before the Civil War. A relatively new institute, about 25 years old then, in 1851, the Maryland Institute for Mechanical Arts, today we know it as MICA, moves in to the North building, the North Market building. They redo the building. They keep shops on the first floor, but the second floor becomes classroom space and an enormous public event hall seating 6,000 people. Lots of galas. It sort of becomes the center of Baltimore society. Lots of galas, lots of balls, lots of public lectures. Abraham Lincoln, President Lincoln, even gave an address there at one point. So after the Civil War, the market continues to thrive. Canneries along the harbor are coming into being at this time, and they're sending buyers to the market in the really early hours to buy up wholesale produce and seafood to can before the regular shoppers got there. As we near the 1900s, though, the neighborhood starts to change a little bit. It becomes more of a hub for seamen who are on leave and longshoremen. So maybe not surprisingly, the number of homeowners declines, but the number of taverns and the number of boarding houses goes up. So a little bit of a change. And then 1904 happens, and that's the Great Fire of 1904. Sort of like the Big Bang Theory. Almost nothing, whatever happened before, it almost doesn't matter at all. This is the start. The fire, of course, did start at where the Baltimore Arena is. It blows east to the Jones Falls and basically where Baltimore Street is, where the Children's Museum is today. And then it blows south down to the wharves, and it in fact burns many of the wharves on the harbor. Sadly, it burns Diffenderfer's shop. The Diffenderfer family had sold it before then, but it burns his building on Baltimore Street to the ground. But surprisingly, a few things survive, a few household names that you'll recognize survive, including a bottle of Lee and Perrin's Worcestershire sauce, as well as a bottle of McElhenney's Tabasco sauce. Those are products of the day that still are around. Kind of interesting there. After the fire, the city rebuilds quickly. They rebuild the market buildings. And then just in 1912, so a few years later, they take the opportunity to drain what the city leaders considered a nuisance, which was the Jones Falls, which was still flooding and was still more or less being used as the city's open sewer. So in 1912, they put the Jones Falls in two big pipes and they pave over it with what is today President Street. So things are going well, and the market is continuing to thrive. And then it thrives until about the 1960s or early 1970s, when a lot of the vendors move out to Jessup and start wholesale businesses out there today. And in fact, today there is a thriving wholesale produce and seafood business. The building that got rebuilt after the fire became known as the Fish Market, and it was a thriving seafood market up until when it went vacant in the 60s and 70s. Micah, of course, does not make it through the fire. The building burns. They move around a little bit to other public market buildings and then move in 1908 to where they are today on Mount Royal Avenue. The Fish Market building, sits empty for a while, but in 1998, Port Discovery repurposes it as a children's museum, and it is fantastic. And I will conclude on two notes. The first is just recently, last year, the whole interior got redone with brand new play and discovery space for kids. So when we're allowed to, I'd encourage you with kids, go back and have some fun. But let me conclude finally with this note. When the Baltimore Metro was expanding in the 1980s, a group of archaeologists and the State Transit Administration did an archaeology dig right underneath the Marsh Market, the Fish Market, now and then what became Port Discovery. And they found all sorts of neat things. And let me just read you a few of these and conclude with my favorite. They found marbles. They found china dolls. They found a china dog. They found walking sticks and shoes. They found coins and gun flints. They found a metal syringe, likely used by a doctor during the Civil War era. And then my favorite thing that they found was something called a courting lamp. And a courting lamp was a lamp that parents of a young woman would fill up with oil, probably not all the way up, and then light. And when the oil ran out and the flame flickered out, the courtier who was there wooing their daughter would have to go home. So one of those was found underneath the Port Discovery Fish Market building today. So with that, I'll say thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.